සැමට උතුම් දළදා සමිඳු සරණයි. ඓතිහාසික කන්ද උඩරට ඇසල පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍යයේ දෙවනි රන්දෝලි පෙරහර අද දිනේ වීදි සංචාරය කිරීමට නියමිතයි. ශ්‍රී ලාංකීය සංස්කෘතියේ සුවිශේෂී මංගල්‍යයක් වශයෙන් ඓතිහාසික කන්ද උඩරට ඇසල පෙරහර හඳුන්වා දෙන්නට පුළුවන්. මල්වතු අස්කිරි ඔබේ මහා විහාරීය මහානායක මාහිම්පාණන් වහන්සේලාගේ අවවාද අනුශාසනා පෙරදැරිව ශ්‍රී දළදා මාලිගාවේ ගරු දේවර්ණ නිලමේතුමන් සිව් මහා දේවාලයන්හි බස්නායක නිලමේතුමන්ලාගේ සංවිධාන ශක්තියෙන් මෙවරත් පෙරහැර සංවිධානය වෙනවා. මේ වෙසස් වූ සංස්කෘතික මංගල්‍ය අසිරිය සියසින් දැක බලා ගන්නට ඔබට මෙවර අවස්ථාව හිමිවන්නේ නැහැ. නමුත් ඔබට රූපවාහිනී මාධ්‍ය ඔස්සේ සහ ශ්‍රී දළදා මාලිගාවේ නිල සමාජ මාධ්‍ය ජාල ඔස්සේ මේ පෙරහැර මංගල්‍ය අසිරිය නරඹන්නට පුළුවන්. ඒ නිසාවෙන් අපි ඔබට බොහොමත්ම ගෞරවයෙන් ආරාධනා කරනවා ඓතිහාසික කන්ද උඩරට ඇසල පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍යයේ දෙවන රන්දෝලි පෙරහැරේ විසිතුර අත්විඳින්නට.
Dalanda Samidu Pihitai. You are now joining us with a special live broadcast of the second Randoli Perahera, brought to you by the Media Bureau of Sri Dalanda Maligava. You are seeing the Perahera officials obtaining permission and the blessings of the Devadan Nilame before commencing their street perambulations. Making his way from the upper to the lower chamber, the Devarana Nilame ceremoniously and reverentially takes the relic casket under the protection of the chief incumbent of the Malvatta Mahaviharaya, Venerable Tibatue Medankara Thero, to the royal tasker.
And now you witness the relic casket being placed within the Ranhilige, mounted on the adorned tusker who will glamour up the Randoli Perahera.
Making the beginning of Kandy Esala Perahera dedicated to Lord Buddha, we see the Perahera officials offering flowers and garlands to the Perahera casket. This is the devout moment when the great tusker steps majestically down from the Mahavahalkada to the Sandagala in preparation to walk the streets of the city. And now we see a bird-eye view of the serene beauty of the ancient city of Kandy, which is also known as the last kingdom of Sri Lanka, Senkadagalapura. With that, we mark the beginning of the Kandy Esala Perahera with the lashing whips of the whip crackers.
Whip crackers take the lead in the Perahera, and these whips are prepared from the dried fiber taken from jute or hemp. Whips were prepared using fiber woven in thin rope into a length of about 7 feet and connected to a rope to make handling easier.
When the rain god pours down life-giving water from the heavenly sky, there we hear the roaring sound of the thundering. This is the very sound symbolized by these lashing whips. They fill the Kandian sky and the hearts of the weavers alike. This is why the whip wielders are tasked with paving the way for the approaching Perahera and the sacred relic casket. This bird eye view presents the beauty of the serene night sky of Kandy along with the great Randoli Perahera.
Under usual circumstances, whips conjure up fear in most minds, but the sight of the Perahera whip masters has the opposite effect, calming the populace, since they are the ones who clear the way for the holy Perahera casket that walk the streets of the city tonight.
Great numbers used to throw coins into the paths of the whip masters as an offering to ward off evil from their children and smooth their life paths. But due to the corona pandemic situation that prevails in Sri Lanka for 2 years, now we don't see such crowd. But we know that all these people are watching the Perahera from the comfort of their homes.
And most of all, this is a beautiful tradition that highlights the basis for giving, offering, and sharing among the people of our land.
In the times of the kings, the whip was an instrument of punishment. But this is not a duty of that nature. Here, this instrument is used to remove fear and create a sense of love and compassion among the people and bring wholesome merits to them. The whipmaster's duty is handed down from generation to generation of their clans. According to our traditions, Peraheras that do not have this pedigree are not even worth being called as such. And following these whipmasters, we see another spectacular event, isn't it, Pumi?
Yes, and of course, rain doesn't come without the sound of thunderbolts. Just
Indeed.
as
Indeed, Pumi. And these thunderbolts are followed by the lightning strikes.
And Isuru, just as lightning flashes across the skies, the Perahera too has its flashes of light whipping across the faces of the people, lining the streets to watch the procession. This is the offering of fire to the gods to water the earth with rain.
Indeed, Puni. The balls of fire is a spectacular sight in the Kandy Esala Perahera, just as you mentioned. The fireball wielders create cyclic patterns in the dark sky, reminding the lay spectators of the lightning that marks a soon-to-be rain. While it may seem like a sport for the young performers, the elderly see it rather as a sacred duty to please the gods.
For a spectator watching the Perahera from afar, these fireballs may remind a dozen of vandals illuminating the streets. And not only illuminating the way for the procession, but it increases the faith and piety of the weavers towards the Lord Buddha.
The sun, moon, earth, universe, solar month, night and day are all cyclic, and the fire dancers highlight these universal cycles and how they warm and cool us in our life cycles. The fire dancers, completely focused and immersed in their art, are keeping their minds and bodies one-pointed as they create their cyclic patterns of fire. This is because the slightest inattention could result in disaster. In the Kandyan kingdom era, there existed 5 ilangams, or main performances. The fireball wielding depicts the Vahala Ilangama, which was one of these major ilangams.
These dancers tame fire and give it as a Dalanda offering, mindful of its part in cooking, protecting crops and chainers and dispelling talkers, creating curiosity, satisfaction and amazement to the people weaving the procession.
Indeed, Pumi. The true import of these dancers is seen when a large group of them perform simultaneously, merging their various fiery elements into an amazing display of light and heat. The fiery samsara cycle, awash in desire, ignorance and anger, is highlighted by the chakras illustrated by these fire dancers. Following that, we now see the Buddhist flag bearers led by a national flag bearer. And this is a team representing the Chandananda Buddhist College of Kandy.
The sight of Buddhist flag creates a sense of unreflecting joy on the part of the people weaving the Kandy Esala procession, reminding them that this is a celebration, devotion, and an offering to the Lord Buddha.
The six-colored flag is displayed in ceremonious form to remind the people simply of the great scope and depth of Buddha's Dhamma. The hexacolored flag garlands the people with six-colored radiation of light attributed to the Buddha, cooling them as nothing else possibly can. And following that, we now see the cloth flag bearers representing the different disas that existed in the Kandyan kingdom in the days of our kings.
Through this, the people were able to identify if the governance of the Kandyan kings were well and in accordance with the Raja Dharma. In those times, the display of these flags were also a political symbol.
And following that, we now see the brass flag bearers, once again representing the disas that existed in the Kandyan kingdom. The first was the Sun and Moon standard of the Satara Korale, and next comes the lion flag of Sat Korale. Then in line, the flag of Matale, Sabargamu's silk flag, and Berunda Pakshya of the Tun Korale. These are some of the flags that we can see depicted in this beautiful site.
And this represents the traditional customs for the Disaves and the Rateralas to participate in the Perahera, bearing their respective flags along with their retinue.
The flag of the Berunda Pakshya, which is a mythical bird, is also a Disa flag.
And now you witness the sight of sword bearers. This magnificently symbolizes the protection given to the Perahera.
And this group of sword bearers is representing the Chandananda Buddhist College of Kandy. One may wonder the function of sword bearers in a Buddhist procession such as this. While Buddhism promotes non-violence, it is with utmost respect and gratefulness that we remind our heroes who sacrificed so much to ensure the protection of the sacred tooth relic and the sovereignty of the country. The sword bearers remind us of these glorious souls. And following these sword bearers, we now see Nadungamuya Raja. And on its mount, we see the Peramune Rala. Our noble ancestors donated many of their properties to the temple of the tooth relic. The secretarial scroll on the hands of the Peramune Rala represents those ancient legal documents, the duty of the officials, the traditions, rituals, and services due in honoring the sacred tooth relic, and the unchanging procedures that need to be followed. And following that, we see the first Hevisi troop representing the Sri Dalanda Maligawa Hevisi troop. There are 4 permanent Hevisi troops in the Temple of the Tooth. It is forbidden to sound any other music instruments until they begin. Malagamana, Udavela, Ihalavela and Molaguda names are synonymous with the Hevisi of Sri Dalanda Maligawa.
Prohibition of use of other traditional musical instruments before the first Hevisi, namely the horanava, talampata, cymbals, bowler, conch, kombua and anklets, is to ensure that the order of the playing theses instruments is not compromised.
Following the Hevisi beaters, who are walking gracefully on the streets of the hill capital city, we now see Vasana. On the mount of Vasana, we see the Gajanayaka Nilame, the chief of the royal elephant stables.
The Gajanayaka Nilame arrives as the royal official in charge of the king's parade of elephants.
And up next, we see a troupe of Kotalapada dancers or water carrier dancers. The water carrier dances depict purity. The dance is simple and an example of the simplicity of the Buddhists. This is why the water carrier is traditionally valued in Buddhism. And this troupe of Kotalapada dancers have been trained by Mr. Nalin Jayasekar of Sri Dalanda Maligawa. The dancers spray the Pirit water on the earth of nation. Saying this, our hearts are lifted by the knowledge and vision of our fertile and beautiful land. And up next, on the Mount of Banda, the elephant, we see an official bearing the Buddhist flag. And Banda is followed by a group of castanet players. The talam putter or the castanets are a simple yet very effective musical instrument. It is used in all the three main dancing traditions of Sri Lanka, namely the Kandian, Low Country and Sabaragamuwa. This troupe of castanet players have been trained by Mr. Nimesh Sumanaratna of Buddhist College of Chandananda. The castanets help all Perahera dancers to keep time as each troupe goes through their moves in accordance with various timing patterns and is a necessary part of the Dalanda procession. The Titmatra or timing pattern of the Kandian dance tradition is provided by this talam putter or castanets. The instrument is made of brass and gives out a tone that is at times ringing. It is one of the instruments of Panchaturya Vadana.
And now you witness the Tusker, Raja from Kotte.
On the Mount of Kotte Raja, we see an official bearing a canopy representing the protection provided to the Perahera. And following that, we see the first Nayandi dancing performance of the second Randoli Perahera. The name Nayandi refers to the costume of these dancers. Similar to the West dancing costume except for the headdress, the Nayandi costume is a part of the ancient royal regalia of the Malaya kings.
And this troupe is being trained by Saman Nilvita.
The Nayandi dance is also known as Adaves or half-West dance. This is essentially a dance of the Kandian dance tradition.
As you witness, the Perahera is played and the verses used for upcountry and Udurata dancing were sung.
Following that, we see two officials bearing the Burmese flag. And these two majestic elephants are Hettimulla elephant and the Velagedura elephant, clad in beautiful blue robes. It should be noted that Burma or Myanmar is one of the few Theravada Buddhist countries in the world.
And as you witness, next is a troupe of Udaki players or narrow drum dancers. This special feature in this type of dance is when they see is witnessed as holding the Udaki or the narrow drum in one hand and beating to the tune of the songs sung by the Buddha's virtues by the artists. And of course, this requires much talent.
Indeed, Pumi. The Udaki is a Sri Lankan drum. As ancient as it is, this musical instrument can be instantly turned and tuned by the Udaki player while he is playing it. It truly is an amazing sight to see how these performers sing songs, dance, tune, and play the instrument at the same time. And up next we see another majestic elephant, and this is the Tusker Gajaba. And on the mount of Gajaba we once again see an official bearing a canopy. And now we see the mixed folk dance. And this is a troupe trained by Mr. PCB Vijay Surya. The mixed folk dance depicts the agrarian society which prevailed in Sri Lanka in the times of our kings. When the ancient Sinhala villagers got some leisure time to socialize with others, their eager cards chose folk dances and poetry to entertain themselves. As instruments, they used the most common things that they could find, such as wooden sticks, tambourines, castanets, and so on. And following that, we see Veera the elephant. What we see up next is a spectacular sight that we did not see in the Kumal Perahera. This troupe of tambourine dancers are trained by Mr. Aryapala Vijayamanna. As you can see, they are playing with the Atrabana or the tambourine, which is found in the locality of Sri Lanka and also in few other South Asian countries as a simple musical instrument.
As you can witness, the tambourine is commonly spun with the use of dancers' hands, a long thin pole, or with the use of one's teeth sometimes to hold short sticks, at the end of which the tambourines roll.
Balancing the tambourine like this on a wooden stick requires a great deal of practice and skill. And these dances also remind us of the need that a Buddhist should balance his life in the face of Ashtaloka Dharma. Up next we see a duo of elephants, and on their mounts we see two officials bearing the Burmese flag. These two elephants are Madhu and Kandula.
And now you witness a team of Pantheru dances.
This troupe of Pantheru dancers have been trained by Mr. Palita Hapugoda. Although the Pantheru can be seen in all the three major dance forms, the Pantheru dance is exclusively a Kandian traditional dance. It can also be called as a semi-classical folk dance. The origin of this dance goes back to the ancient ritual called Suvisi Vivarana. Here the dancers sing praises for Lord Gautama Buddha for obtaining Vivarana from 24 previous Buddhas to attain Buddhahood. And following that, we see Buruma Raja and Singha Raja making their ways to light up the Kandy Esala Perahera. In contrast to the Kumbal Perahera, we can see that the elephants are clad in vibrant colors in the Randoli procession.
And now you witness the most unique and the most recognized of the Kandyan dances. And it is a troupe of West dancers that is being followed.
Indeed, Pumi. The West dancer is adorned with a traditional costume that represents the royal regalia of the Malaya kings. These dancers have proven themselves worthy of the West Tattua or the West headgear through a number of tests. It takes years of practice and a great effort to obtain that.
This troupe of West dancers are being trained by Ishanta Ihalagana and Lasanta Vanseka. And as you can witness, these dances are being accompanied by Gatabera drummers.
And Pumi, according to one of the legends about the West dancers, it is said that the West dancer is representing the royal regalia of the Malaya kings who came to Sri Lanka to cure the Pandavasudeva king of a curse called Divi Dosha. And these West dancers are paying homage to the sacred Perahera casket that is being carried on the streets of the hill capital city behind them. And up next we see the Karya Karavana Korale, the official in charge of the duties that is happening when it comes to the sacred duties of the Sri Dalada Maligava. The Karya Karavana Korale is the second in command of the Diyavarana Nilame, and it is a heritage position given by royal decree. And now we see the most awaited moment. The Perahera casket is being carried by the royal tusker. And the sacred tooth relic casket is being carried by Indiraja, the tusker, from the Sri Dalada Maliga stables. And on either side we have Pandula and Mian Raja. And following that, we see the chamber of versifiers or the Kavikara Maduva.
And now you witness the careers of flowers and oil lamps.
Once again, this reminds us that this entire procession is a puja to the sacred tooth relic and to Lord Buddha. This troupe has been trained by Mr. Nalin Jayasekara. And following that, we see the next West dancing troupe. And they are welcoming the impending approach of the Diyavarana Nilame of Sri Dalada Maligava. It should be noted that the Kandian dancers' skill and dance form have been brought to the national consciousness by the Dalanda Perahera alone. This is the West dancing troupe trained by Mr. Sanjeeva Verapitiya and Mr. Peter Surasena. Now we see the Diyavarana Nilame, Honorable Pradeep Nilanga Dala. The Diyavarana Nilame, appointed by the royal decree, is the individual tasked with protecting the Dalada with his own life. The honor and respect provided by the Tum Singhale to the king for the land is given to the Diyavarana Nilame. The Diyavarana Nilame ensures that the rituals and traditions associated with the Dalada Maligava are strictly adhered to. Additionally, he is also responsible for protecting those who are taking part of the great Dalada heritage. This uplifting sight reminds us of our ancient Kandian glory, with the Diyavarana Nilame walking in state, adulated by a massive troop of Kandian dancers in their regalia and watched over by his armed guards. And he is followed by the 10 Vidanes. The Vidanes, or the leaders of the 10 villagers, accompany the Diyavarana Nilame as they collectively pay their respect to the Dalada Panse. And following that, we now see the commencement of the Sri Mahanatha Devala Perahera. And now we see the godly ornaments of God Natha being carried to be placed on the mount of the elephant for the tusker who will be fortunate to carry them in the streets of Kandy. Now we see the Buddhist flag bearers representing the Sri Mahanatha Devala procession. These flag bearers are from the Civil Defence Center of Pallekali. God Natha is essentially a Buddhist god who is aspiring to attain Buddhahood in the near future in the name of Maitri Buddha. And now we see the Rohana elephant who belongs to Mr. Kannangala from Horana. It should be noted that the color associated to god Natha is yellow. Therefore, most of the performers and the elephants representing the Natha Devala procession will be clad in yellow robes or garments. And Rohana is followed by the Natha Devala Hevisi True, which is trained by Mr. S.Y.G. Vijayasena. We see the drums being decorated with adorable colors, showing the respect to the godly ornaments of god Natha that is being carried on the streets of the hill capital in the second Randoli procession today. Hevisi is an offering of sound to Lord Buddha that has existed in Sri Lanka since the arrival of Sangamitha Theri with the sacred Bodhi tree. The sound of the Hevisi instruments can therefore invoke the faith or Shraddha in the Buddhist heart. Up next we see Arjuna elephant, who belongs to Vauru Kannala Rajamaha Viharaya. And on the mount of Arjuna, we can see an official bearing an ankusa or an elephant god, which is decorated with artistic patterns. Another interesting fact about the Natha Devalaya is that it is one of the oldest buildings that still exists in Kandy. It is believed that the Natha Devalaya has been constructed in the 14th century.
And now you witness a troupe of dancers with yak's tails, or it is called Chamara dances.
These Savaran dancers are making their ways in the rhythm of the flute dancers, flute players, as well as the castanet players. The Savaran play a vital role in any Perahera in Sri Lanka, adding a cool and gentle breeze to the Perahera as well as to the hearts of the people who are watching it.
As an act of devotion to the relic, these dancers use a fan made of fine threads and cords as you witness, and engage in a controlled dance symbolizing their worship. The simultaneous rise and fall of the fans is a gentle and joyful sight to the people who are triggered towards the wholesome and devotional thoughts towards the Lord Buddha.
Indeed, Pumi. And this energetic Savaram dancers have been trained by Mr. Dilshan Shalika from Arya Rangayatanaya. And following that, we see a symbol of the sun, which represents the omnipresence of God Natha. And this is the elephant Vichita Raja from Dibulagala Rajamahaviharaya. And following that, we see a troupe of Pantheru dancers.
The Pantheru or tambourines without the skin will bring the purity of Dalanda procession into the minds of the people, and as they step across the promenade, the sound of the Pantheru too is synonymous with the Kandy Esala Perahera.
According to one belief, the Pantheru instrument is made in the form of Chakra Yudaya, the prime weapon of Chakra, the king of gods. In the classical dance classifications, Pantheru dance falls under Ghanaian Natum category, along with castanet dance that we already witnessed. And this troupe of Pantheru dancers have been trained by Mr. Nimesh Nivantaka from Nimesh Rangayatanaya in Colombo. Up next are a pair of very popular elephants. These are Kumari and Bandara, the mother and son, who belong to Devinwara Sri Maha Vishnu Devalaya. This is a Thammattam troupe representing the Natha Devala procession. And now we see the elephant Lasada, followed by another troupe of West dancers, adding more color to the Natha Devala procession in the second Randoli Perahera. Talking talking about the legendary origin of the Hatapaha Mangalaya of the Kohomba Kankarya ritual, which was the birthplace of West dancing as well as Nayandi dancing, it should be noted that it was the curse of Kuweni, the betrayed queen of King Vijaya, that required an elaborate ritual such as this to save the king from the curse. And now we see the Narumatra, an act performed by the West dancers. The hymns and the praises sung in the West dancing and the Nayandi dancing display an influence of the Prashasti songs of the Kotte kingdom. And now we see a majestic trio of elephants, one of whom is carrying the godly ornaments of God Nata. And these are Kumari from Kanda Viharaya, Muturaja also from Kanda Viharaya, and Rani who belongs to Kodagama Nalaka Jai Singha. Now we see the godly ornaments of God Nata in its full glamour. Coming into our sights up next is another troupe of West dancers. And this is a troupe trained by Mr. Asanka Karunaratna from Galioya. The West dancing is a performance that we can see in most of our auspicious work, even in our day-to-day lives, such as weddings and Pirit and chanting occasions. Now we see the Nilame representing the Natha Devalaya in Kandy. This is Mr. Anura Iriyagama from Vegiriya Natha Devalaya. We also see Mr. Akalanka Bandara from Dodangwala Natha Devalaya. Following that, we now see the commencement of the Vishnu Devala procession. We now witness the godly ornaments of God Vishnu being carried by the officials to be placed on the mount of the elephant, who will be taking them in the streets of hill capital in the second Randoli procession. We now see the flag bearers representing the Vishnu Devala procession. These flags are in fact symbols of the dominance of God Vishnu. He is considered as one of the patron gods of Buddhism. In fact, it is said that Lord Buddha himself commanded God Vishnu to protect the Buddhism in Sri Lanka. God Vishnu is also found in the Hindu pantheon as one of the chief gods in the Hindu religion. One can see that most of those who take part in this procession are mostly clad in blue. This is because the color affiliated with God Vishnu is blue. Now we see the heresy troop belonging to the Sri Maha Vishnu Devalaya. This troop has been trained by P.V. James Guru Nansi. Atata Vitata Vitatata Gana Susira. All these Panchaturya are included in the heresy troops. Sangamita Theri brought 18 schools of art with her, and Avisi was one of them. Her arrival to Sri Lanka happened in 288 BC. And this gives us an idea how ancient this tradition is. And following the Avisi true, we now see the first elephant representing the Vishnu Devala procession. And this is the she-tusker Manike, who belonged to Mr. Anura Kempitiya. Following that, we see another troupe of fan dancers adding more color and splendor to the Vishnu Devala procession. Clad in vibrant blue color, we see two more beautiful elephants. And now we see another group of Udaki players. And this troupe of Udaki players have been followed by another duo of elephants representing the Vishnu Devala procession in the second Randoli Perahera. Up next we see another troupe of Nayandi dancers. Talking about the family lines which are famous for Nayandi dancing, we cannot forget the prominent families of Narampanawa, Alautua and Galdola. The Nayandi dance is also known as Adaves or half-west dance. This is essentially a dance of the Kandian dance tradition. Considering the technical and visual aspects, this can be categorized as a segment of Rupa Natum. And now we see another trio of elephants. And on their mounts we see 3 officials bearing canopies and cobra heads, once again representing the protection given to the godly ornaments of God Vishnu. The Pantheru has different stories about its origin. According to one of the stories, it is made in the form of the anklet of goddess Patini. It is essentially a Kandian dance. We can see how these performers are performing very acrobatic movements, showing their devotion and the respect. costume of the West dancer consists of 64 parts. And the West dancer that we see in the screen is an icon of the Sri Lankan identity. Now is a devout moment of the Sri Mahavishnu Devalaya. We now see the godly ornaments of God Vishnu being carried on the streets of Kandy.
and you see yet another troupe of West dancers. The West dance is an ancient dance ritual that was performed in a purification ceremony known as the Kuhumakankariya. Only men perform this dance. And most importantly, West dancers had to traditionally don a costume of 64 ornaments, and is believed to be a replica of the attire worn by the associated deity god Kuhuma. As the drums beat, the dancer moves his hands, feet and body in perfect harmony with fellow performers until the crescendo of his performance, with every person in audience awaiting anticipation.
Now we see the Basnayaka Nilme representing the Sri Maha Vishnu Devalaya. With that we make the end of the Kataragama Deva Vishnu Devala procession and the beginning of the Kataragama Devala procession. God Skanda is revered not only by the Buddhists but also by the Hindu devotees. We now observe how the godly ornaments of God Skanda or God Kataragama are being carried by the officials of the Kataragama Devalaya to be placed on the mount of the Tusker, who will be taking them on the streets of Kandy. And now we see the flag bearers representing the Sri Maha Kataragama Devala procession. God Skanda or Kataragama is the warrior god of Hinduism. He is also the protective god of vehicles. The Buddhist flag reminds us that this is a Buddhist procession.
And not only that, the Buddhist flag is in its entirely, which signifies the indivisibility of all sentient beings regardless of situation, race and nation.
Absolutely, Pumi. The cloths that are being carried by the Kataragama Devala procession are mostly depicting the image of the peacock. The reason for this is that the peacock is considered as the vehicle of god Kataragama. According to the legends, the peacock is actually a demon that god Skanda defeated in one of his battles and later used the demon as his vehicle. And up next we see the Hevisi troop representing the Sri Maha Kataragama Devala procession. One distinguishing feature of the Kataragama Devala procession is that it shows a South Indian influence. This is maybe due to the fact that God's Kanda is most revered in India as well as in certain parts of Sri Lanka. It shows that these cultures are interconnected, thus demonstrating to the world that the Kandy Esala Perahera is a fusion of cultural identities that has lasted for over 2,500 years. And now we see the Gajanayaka Nilame of the Kataragama Devalaya carrying a golden ankusa on his hand. And up next we see a group of castanet players representing the Sri Maha Kataragama Devala procession. Compared with the other Devala Peraheras, I think the Kataragama Devala procession has a faster beat and a rhythm.
Indeed, Isru, and that is of course to symbolize the energy of God Kataragama.
This troupe of castanet players have been trained by Ms. Ajanta Kanda Gedara from Sarasavi Kalayathanaya in Kegor. We see two officials carrying the sun and the moon emblems representing the godly dominance of God's Kanda. In fact, God's Kanda is considered to be the son, one of the sons of the main god Shiva in Hinduism. And now we see a troupe of wooden stick dancers.
The Likeli or wooden stick dance is an instantly recognizable cultural icon of the Kandyan kingdom. It depicts the traditional martial art of Angampora.
Indeed, Pyumi. And following that, we see another majestic elephant making his way to represent the Kataragama Devalaya. And this is a Ratna elephant who belongs to the Palmadulla Rajamaha Viharaya. Following that, we now see a troupe of Udakki dancers. These Udakki players have been trained by Mr. Dhammika Bandara Tennakon.
As you can see, this musical instrument is a small double-headed, hourglass-shaped hand drum used to accompany songs. The dance of the Udaki players is relatively simple, and the small drum-like instrument is a unique addition to the procession, which contributes to the variety of drum beats filling the air.
After the Udaki troop, we now see the fourth elephant representing the Kataragama Devalaya, and that was Sama, who belonged to Kirulapana Alanmatiniyarama Viharaya. And what we see now is one of the most distinguishing dances of the Kataragama Devala procession. This is a peacock dance. And as I mentioned earlier, the peacock is considered as the vehicle of god Kataragama. Another interesting fact about god Skanda is that one of his two spouses, the Tevani Amma and Valliamma is of Sri Lankan descent. This is why in the Sella Kataragama and Kataragama areas we say we have the influence of god Kataragama. The devotees of Kataragama Devala procession do rigorous tasks to show their devotion and to prove their respect to the gods in some of the acts. And now we see Chula the elephant, who belongs to Palmadula Rajamahavihare once again. And after that, we see the Velayudhaya, the godly weapon of god Kataragama, and the Trishul or the trident, which is the prime weapon of the chief god Ishvara, who is the father of god Kataragama. As I mentioned a little while ago, the devotees of god Kataragama undergo rigorous tasks sometimes to prove their devotion. The Kavadi these performers are carrying can weigh up to 30 kilograms, which shows that it is no easy task to carry it on the streets for such a long time unless they have a pure devotion. Devotion sees no age, as we can see. Very old and very young do this performance and engage in these activities alike. According to one belief, the kavadi that these worshipping devotees are carrying represents the godly feet of God Kataragama. So, these pilgrims consider that they are carrying the godly burden of God Kataragama. Group of Kavadi dancers have been trained by Mr. Indika Prasad Kularatna. The color affiliated to this war god is red, and this color is depicted in most of the clothes that these devotees are wearing. We can also see that color in the robes of the elephants. And now we see the Panduka elephant who belongs to Mr. Chandana Katriyarachi. Now we witness another performance by a West dancing troupe that represents the Kataragama Devala Perahera. The hymns and the praises sung in this West dancing show the influence of Prashasti songs, and they are singing praises of God Kataragama. And what we witness now is the Tamil Nadaswaram troupe, trained by P. Suresh. Tamil Nadaswaram is a troupe of musicians who essentially show the South Indian music. These are the musical instruments that are used in most of the kovils, the Hindu temples, to show the respect to the gods. And now we see the Iyer, or the chief trustee of the Katharagama Devalaya, the individual who is tasked to protect the godly ornaments of God Katharagama. The godly ornaments of God Katharagama are being carried by a trio of majestic elephants. And these are Asala elephant, Sankaraja elephant and Aruna elephant. And following that, we now see the West troop, which is trained by Mr. Upananda Talgahagoda from Ratnakalayatanaya. And today, in the place of the Basnayaka Nilame of Sri Maha Katharagama Devala procession, the West dancers are paying their respect to Honorable Ryan Valisundara from Ambokka Devalaya. That marks the end of the Sri Maha Katharagama Devala procession and the commencement of the Sri Maha Pattini Devala procession. We now see the Alatti Ammas performing their rituals before the commencement of the procession.
And now you witness yet another troop of Buddhist flag bearers.
Goddess Pattini is a deity who commands great respect among most of the citizenry of the country. This is the only female representation at the Dalanda procession. Therefore, in this segment of the procession alone, we are able to see female dancers performing. Folklore stated that the goddess Pattini was a great model who preserved her chastity, and due to this great and noble quality, she could obtain the highest veneration of human beings as a guardian deity. Following the Buddhist flag bearers, we now see the first Hevisi troop representing the Pattini Devala procession. This troop of Hevisi performers have been trained by Mr. M.G. Palita Nishanka, Mr. M.G. Sirisena, and Mr. M.G. Premadasa. Belief in Goddess Pattini with faith brought blessings on small children and women. She is supposed to be a goddess of noblest qualities, and those who believed in her were cured of hidden diseases, skin diseases, so on, provided they led a religious life. This is why, even amidst pandemics and famines, people sought the protection of Goddess Pattini. And now we see the Horana Banda elephant, who belongs to Mr. Kitsiri Pitiya from Horana.
As you can witness, this troupe of paddy dancers are being trained by Takshila Silvardhana from Takshila Kalayatanaya Yatiyalagala.
Indeed, and this is one of the most spectacular dance performances of the Perahera. This depicts the agrarian society and the simple life that our ancestors used to live. The main purpose of having the Kandy Esala procession is to invoke the rain by pleasing the gods. And this shows how important the rain is to the Kandian farmer. And following that, we see another duo of elephants marching forth. And these majestic elephants are Balangoda Raja Alia, who belongs to Mr. Asanka Vijaya, and Karindu elephant who belongs to Kobavaka Dhammadinnathero. Following that, we now see a troupe of Paturu dance team. This troupe has been trained by Mr. Nishanta Sanjeeva from Navarangla Kalayatanaya. Following that, we see Balangoda Kumari, the she-tusker, who belongs to Mr. Asanka Vijaya, and Pinnavala Gagana elephant, who belongs to the elephant orphanage of Pinnavala. And now we see a Chamara dancing troupe, trained by Miss Ajanta Kandagedara from Sarasavi Kalayatanaya in Molagoda.
The Chamara dances accompanied by the flute creates a harmonious effect.
It should be noted that the female dancers invoke the concept of bounty and fertility. We just saw the she-tusker Manike, who belongs to Miss Shriyani Gunawardena from Dangovita. Following that, we see a West dancing troupe trained by Mr. Mithun Bandara. These West dancers are singing praises and hymns in honor of Goddess Pattini. We now see the godly ornaments of Goddess Pattini being carried by Mangala elephant, who belongs to Mr. Udara Galapati from Giriulla, and on either side we see the she-tusker Manike and the she-tusker Gonakumbura. Manike belongs to Mr. S.U. Nishankar, whereas Gonakumbura she-tusker belongs to Mr. Richard Gonakumbura of Balangoda. And up next we see another West dancing troupe. These West dancers are paying their respect to Chanaka Bandara Nayaka, the Honorable Nilame, who is taking place as the Bus Nayaka Nilame of the Pattini Devala procession today.
And these troupe of West dancers are being trained by Chandana K. Jayaratna from Chandana Kalayatane, Matale.
Honorable Chanaka Bandara Nayaka is from Ambokka Shri Kataragama Devalaya. And now we see the Randolis being carried, representing the 4 Devalas. We see the representations of Natha Devalaya, Vishnu Devalaya, Kataragama Devalaya, and last but not least, Pattini Devalaya. What you just saw was the conclusion of the second Randoli Perahera. We are grateful for the help and commitment of both state and non-state supporters who worked tirelessly to make this event successful.
Let there be timely rains that will bring life-giving water to our fields and ensure a bountiful harvest.
May our country prosper. Dalanda Samudupethai.